All right, we are a little bit behind schedule, but I had to get my posts out. So, let's go ahead and settle in, get comfortable, and see what the story we have tonight will develop and evolve into as we go. Welcome back. This is our third night of reading from Hermann Hesse's Demian. This has been an interesting journey so far. We started out with our young protagonist, or whatever his really situation is going to be, because he's like half narrator, half autobiographical study, half there's too many halves. Anyway, Emil started out the story as kind of a little bit of a preppy kid, but he was certain that there was more to the world, and so he fell into a bit of a suspect company. And by wanting to encourage and fit in, he played off and invented stories of his own daring do. Well, those didn't really work out so well, and he ended up being blackmailed and bullied for a few years on that. But in the end, he was rescued from that ignoble commission, and went off to school on his own, and pretty immediately fell in with a bad crowd there. Decided that, you know what, he's going to be the hard-drinking, life-of-the-party type, and actually about killed himself in the bottom of the bottle. So, as he was, having his family lose hope in him, getting ready to be disowned, likely kicked from school, he found inspiration to turn his life around in a young woman who he never spoke to and was immediately head over heels infatuated with, and took it upon himself to learn how to paint, to capture her image for his own inspiration, and it went about as well as could be expected, but it did drive the need for drink clean from his mind, and a little bit of parasocial behavior never really hurt anybody. Right? Anyway, so he's found his life again, but he seems to find that things are a little odd as he looks at this picture. It's less so much Beatrice that he's yes, that's the VTuber indeed. It's less so much Beatrice that his newest fixation. No, the painting really turned out to be more a little bit of a self-portrait, but also a little bit of Demian. And so we circled back to Emil's first fixation. Well, not really first fixation, but one of the one who peeled back the curtain and provided us with our first little bit of, minor blasphemies. Nothing too much to worry about there. So, let's get back to our story and see where things will go from here. We left off mid-chapter last time just because it was an unfortunate sequence of breaking and chaptering, and there's only so many so much time in the readings, and the longer we gap, the less likely it is we're going to have a clean break tonight. Oh no. All right, let's shift back to our reading nook, and we'll see where we'll go tonight. So, we are continuing from chapter 4 of Demian, about 2/3 of the way through the chapter. My longing for Max Demian was again eager. I had had no news of him for several years. On one occasion only, I had met him in the holidays. I see now that I have failed to mention this short meeting in my narrative, and I see that this was owing to shame and self-conceit on my part. I must make up for it now. So then, once in the holidays, I was parading my somewhat tired, blasé self through the town. As I was sauntering along, swinging my stick and examining the old, unchanged features of the bourgeoisie Philistines whom I despised, damn dude, I met my one-time friend. Scarcely had I caught sight of him when I started involuntarily. With lightning rapidity, my thoughts were carried back to Frank Cromer. I hoped and prayed Demian had really forgotten the story. It was so disagreeable to be under this obligation to him, simply owing to a silly, childish affair. Still, I was under an obligation. He seemed to be waiting to see whether I would greet him. I did, as calmly as possible under the circumstances, and he gave me his hand. That was indeed his old handshake. So strong, warm, and yet cool, so manly. He looked me attentively in the face and said, "You've grown a lot, Sinclair," he said. He himself seemed quite unchanged, just as old, just as young as ever. He proposed we should go for a walk, and we talked of secondary matters, not of the past. I remembered that I had written to him several times without having received an answer. I hoped he had forgotten this as well, those silly, silly letters. He made no mention of them. At that time there was no Beatrice and no picture. I was still in the period of my dissipation. Outside the town, I invited him to come with me to an inn. He came with much ostentation. I ordered a bottle of wine and filled a couple of glasses. I clinked glasses with him, showing him how conversant I was with student drinking customs, and I emptied my first glass at a gulp. "Do you frequent public houses often?" he asked me. "Oh, yes," I said, with a drawl. "What else is there to do? It's certainly more amusing than anything else, after all." "You think so?" Perhaps it may be so. There's certainly something very pleasing about it. Intoxication, bacchanalian orgies. But I find, with most people who frequent public houses, the sense of abandon is lost. It seems to me there is something typically Philistine, bourgeoisie, in the public house habit. Of course, for just one night, with burning torches, to have a proper orgy and a drunken revel. But to do the same thing over and over again, drinking one glass after another, that's hardly the real thing. Can you imagine Faust sitting evening after evening drinking at the same table? I drank, and looked at him with some enmity. "Yes, but everyone isn't a Faust," I said curtly. He looked at me with a somewhat surprised air. Then he laughed in his old superior way. "What's the good of quarrelling about it? In any case, the life of a toper, of a libertine, is, as I imagine, more exciting than that of a blameless citizen. And then, I have read it somewhere, the life of a profligate is one of the best preparations for a mystic. There are always such people as St. Augustine, who become seers. Before, he was a sort of rake and profligate." I was distrustful, and wished by no means to let him take a superior attitude towards me. So I said with a blasé air, "Well, everyone according to his taste. I haven't the slightest intention of doing that, becoming a seer or anything." Demian flashed a glance at me from half-closed eyes. "My dear Sinclair," he said slowly, "it wasn't my intention to hurt your feelings. Besides, Neither of us knows to what end you drink. There is that in you which orders your life for you, and which knows why you are doing it. It is good to realize this. There is someone in us who knows everything, wills everything, does everything better than we do ourselves. But excuse me, I must go home. We did not linger over our leave-taking. I remained seated, very dejected, and emptied the bottle. I found, when I got up to go, that Demian had already paid for it. That made me more angry still. This little event recurred to my thoughts, which were full of Demian, and the words he had spoken in the inn came back to my mind, retaining all their old freshness and significance. It is good to know there's one in us who knows everything. I looked at the picture hanging in the window, now quite dark. The eyes glowed still. It was Demian's look. On it was the look of the one inside me who knows all. Oh, I longed for Demian. I knew nothing of his whereabouts. For me, he was unattainable. I knew only that he was supposed to be studying somewhere or other, and that after the conclusion of his school career, his mother had left the town. I called up in my mind all the reminiscences of Max Demian, from the Cromer affair onwards. A great deal he had formerly said came back to me. Today, everything still had a meaning. All was of real concern to me. And what he had said at our last, not very agreeable meeting, about the libertine and the saint, suddenly crossed my mind. Was it not just so with me? Had I not lived in filth and drunkenness, my senses blunted by dissipation, until a new life impulse, the direct contrary of the old, awoke in me? Namely, the desire for purity, the longing to be saintly. So I went on. From reminiscence to reminiscence, night had long since fallen, and outside it was raining. In recollection, as well, I heard it rain. It was the hour under the chestnut trees when he first questioned me concerning Frank Cromer. So guessing my first secrets. One after another, these souvenirs came to mind. Conversations on the way to school, the confirmation class, and then I recollected my very first meeting with Max Demian. What had we been talking about? I could not for the moment recollect. But I took my time. I thought deeply. At last I remembered. We were standing in front of our house, after he had imparted to me his opinion about Cain. Then he spoke to me about the old, almost obliterated crest which stood over the door, in the keystone, which widened as it got higher. He said it interested him, and that one ought not to let such things escape one's notice. That night I dreamt of Demian and of the crest. It changed perpetually. Now Demian held it in his hands. Now it was small and grey. Now very large and multicolored. But he explained to me that it was always one and the same. But at last he forced me to eat the crest. As I swallowed it, I felt with terror that the bird on the crest was alive inside me. My stomach was swollen, and the bird was beginning to consume me. With the fear of death upon me, I commenced to struggle. Then I woke up. I felt relieved. It was the middle of the night, and I heard the rain blowing into the room. I got up to close the window, and, in doing so, trod on a bright object which lay on the floor. In the morning I found it was my painting. It was lying there in the wet, and had rolled itself up. In order to dry it, I stretched it between two sheets of blotting paper, and placed it under a heavy book. When I looked at it the next day, it was dry, but it had changed. The red mouth had paled, and had become smaller. Now, it was exactly Demian's mouth. I now began to paint a new picture, namely that of the bird on the crest. I could not recollect any more what it really looked like. Neither could I form a clear image of the whole, as even if one stood directly in front of our door, the crest was scarcely recognizable. It was so old, and had several times been painted over. The bird stood or sat on something, perhaps on a flower, or on a basket or nest, or on a treetop. I did not bother about that, and began with the part I could picture clearly. In answer to a confused prompting, I began straight away with strong colors. On my paper, the head of the bird was golden yellow. I continued my work at intervals, when I was in the mood for it, and after a few days the thing was completed. Now, it was a bird of prey, with a sharp, bold hawk's head. The lower half of the body was fixed in a dark terrestrial globe, out of which it was trying to escape. It was working to escape, as if out of a giant egg. The background was sky blue. The longer I gazed at the sheet, the more it seemed to me that this was the colored crest which I had visualized in my dream. It would not have been possible for me to have written a letter to Demian, even if I had known where to send it, but I decided, acting under a suggestion which came to me in a dreamy sort of way, as under all my promptings of that period, to send him the picture with the hawk, whether it would reach him or not. I wrote nothing thereon, not even my name. I carefully cut the border, bought a large paper cover, and wrote on it my friend's former address. Then I sent it off. The approach of an examination caused me to work harder than usual in school. The masters had again received me into grace, since I had suddenly changed my vile conduct. I was not even now by any means a good pupil, but neither I nor anyone else seemed to remember that. Half a year before, my expulsion from the school had been imminent. My father now wrote to me as formerly, adopting his old, cheerful tone, without reproaches or threats. Yet I had no impulse to explain to him or to anyone how the change was brought about. It was merely chance that this change coincided with the wishes of my parents and the masters. It did not bring me into closer contact with the others, but isolated me still more. I myself was ignorant of the tendency of the change in me. It might be leading me to Demian, to a distant fate. It had begun with Beatrice, but for some time past I had been living in quite an unreal world with my paintings and my thoughts of Demian, so that she quite disappeared from my mind, as she did from my view. I should not have been able to say a word to anyone of my dreams or of my expectations of the inner change realized in me, not even if I had wished to do so. But I had not the faintest desire ever to broach the subject. All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 4. So there was a few things going on here, even just in the little bit that was where we jumped back in. The whole part with the crest and the bird, it was definitely a bit of a Chekhov's gun early on, where it was hinted at and talked about as sitting over the entryway. But now it's really coming back into play, particularly with the painting of the bird, where it's breaking out of its shell and coming out. Yeah, your read on Emil just keeps getting stronger and stronger. And there's also a completely aside. I had been thinking when we started this that we hadn't read German before, and it completely escaped my mind that we'd already read Faust, which conveniently was referenced here. So, haha! We do have decent taste after all. But yeah, so the development of Emil as a character is... it's hard to say that it's incredibly interesting or deep, because he kind of flits from one personality trait to another. He started out being a young man full of prospect, but feeling himself outside of the good or the good world, the light or the dark, either one. And as he's grown, that sort of outsideness has only continued more and more. He's flirted with the dark, but comes back to the world of light and ideals, and kind of goes back and forth. But now he's maybe really coming to be himself. And yeah, he definitely has he's very typical of the young, gifted, from a good family, so reasonably well off. Not so much a my dad's a lawyer sort, but a very solidly self-hating bougie. It is what it is. We saw a lot of that sort when we were reading some of our earlier books. We saw it from some of the artists when we were reading The King in Yellow. We saw it in the dilettantes when we were reading The Sun Also Rises. These people that have lots of money and not a lot of sense and more time than they know what to do with. So, it's a familiar character archetype. And we may have lived through some of these ourselves as you grow up and realize that, it's all part of coming of age. How we start doesn't really matter so much as where we end up. Well, let's go ahead and continue with Chapter 5. The bird fights its way out of the egg. My painted dream bird was on its way, searching out my friend. An answer came to me in the most curious manner. In my classroom in school, I found at my desk, in the interval between 2 lessons, a piece of paper slipped between the pages of my book. It was folded in the manner we used for passing notes to one another in class. I wondered who could have sent me such a note, as I was not so intimate with any of the boys that one of them should wish to write to me. I thought it was a summons to participate in some school rag or other, in which, however, I should not have taken part. I replaced the note unopened in my book. During the lesson, it fell by chance into my hands again. What, Simba? I toyed with the paper, unfolded it without thinking, and discovered a few words written thereon. I threw a glance at the writing. One word riveted my attention. Terrified, I read on, while my heart seemed to become numb with a sense of destiny. The bird fights its way out of the egg. The egg is the world. Whoever will be born must destroy a world. The bird flies to God. The name of the god is Abraxas. I sank into deep meditation after I read the words through several times. It admitted of no doubt. This was Demian's answer. None could know of the bird except our 2 selves. He had received my picture. He had understood and helped me to explain its significance. But where was the connection in all this? And what worried me above all, what did Abraxas mean? I had never read or heard of the word. The name of the god is Abraxas. The hour passed without my hearing anything of the lesson. The next lesson began, the last of the morning. It was taken by quite a young assistant master, fresh from the university, to whom we had already taken a liking, because he was young and pretended to no false dignity with us. We were reading Herodotus under Dr. Fallen's guidance. This was one of the few school subjects which interested me. But this time my attention wandered. I had mechanically flung open my book, but I did not follow the translation, and remained lost in thought. For the rest, I had already several times had the experience that what Demian had said to me in the confirmation class was right. If you willed a thing strongly enough, it happened. If, during the lesson, I was deeply immersed in thought, I need not fear that the master would disturb my peace. Certainly, if you were absent-minded or sleepy, then he stood suddenly there. That had already happened to me several times. But if you were really thinking, if you were genuinely sunk in thought, then you were safe. And I had already put to the test what he had said to me about fixing a person with one's eyes. When at school with Demian, I had never been successful in this attempt, but now I often realized that you could accomplish much simply by a fixed look and deep thinking. So I was sitting now, my thoughts far from Herodotus in school, but the master's voice unexpectedly fell on my consciousness like a thunder crash, so that I started with fright. I listened to his voice. He was standing quite close to me. I thought he had already called me by name, but he did not look at me. I breathed a sigh of relief. Then I heard his voice again. Loudly, the word Abraxas fell from his lips. Continuing his explanation, the beginning of which had escaped me, Dr. Follen said, "We must not imagine the ideas of those sects and mystical corporations of antiquity to be as naive as they appear from the standpoint of a rationalistic outlook. Antiquity knew absolutely nothing of science, in our sense of the word. On the other hand, more attention was paid to truths of a philosophical, mystical nature, which often attained to a very high stage of development. Magic, in part, arose therefrom, and often led to fraud and crime. But nonetheless, magic had a noble origin, and was inspired by deep thought. So it was with the teaching of Abraxas, which I have just cited as an example. This name is used in connection with Greek charm formulas. Many opinions coincide in thinking it is the name of some demon of magic, such as some savage people worship today, but it appears that Abraxas had a much wider significance. We can imagine the name to be that of a divinity, on whom the symbolical task was imposed of uniting the divine and the diabolical." The learned little man continued his discourse with much seriousness. No one was very attentive, and as the name did not recur, I was soon immersed in my own thoughts again. To unite the divine and the diabolical rang in my ears. Here was a starting point. I was familiar with the idea from my conversations with Demian in the very last period of our friendship. Demian told me then he had indeed a god whom we revered, or we had it, but this god represented part of the world only, the half which was arbitrarily separated from the rest. It was the official, permitted, bright world. But one should be able to hold the whole world in honor. One should either have a god who was at the same time a devil, or one should institute devil worship together with the worship of God. And now Abraxas was the god, who was at the same time god and devil. For a long time I zealously sought to follow up the trail of ideas further, without success. In addition, I rummaged through a whole library to find out more about Abraxas, but in vain. However, it was not my nature to concentrate my energies on a methodical search after knowledge, a search which would reveal truths of a dead, useless documentary kind. The figure of Beatrice, which had for a certain time occupied so much of my attention, vanished by degrees from my mind, or rather receded slowly, drawing nearer and nearer onto the horizon, becoming paler, more like a shadow as it retreated. She satisfied my soul no longer. A new spiritual development now began to take place in the dreamy existence I led. This existence in which I was strangely wrapped up in myself. The longing for a full life glowed in me, or rather the longing for love. The sex instinct, which for a time had been merged into my worship of Beatrice, required new pictures and aims. Fulfillment was denied me, and it was more impossible than ever for me to delude myself by expecting anything of the girls who seemed to have the happiness of my comrades in their keeping. I again dreamed vividly, even more by day than by night. Images presented themselves to me, desires and the shape of pictures rose up in my imagination, withdrawing me from the outside world, so that my relations with these pictures, with these dreams and shadows, was more real and more intimate than with my actual surroundings. Bro is an early adopter of the 2D over 3D mindset. A certain dream or play of fantasy which recurred to me was full of significance. This dream the most important and the most enduring of my life, was as follows. I returned home. Over the front door shone the crest with the yellow bird on the blue ground. My mother came to meet me. But as I entered and wished to embrace her, it was not she, but a shape I had never before seen. Tall and powerful, resembling Max Demian in my painting, yet different, and quite womanly in spite of its size. This figure drew me towards it, and held me in a quivering, passionate embrace. Rapture and horror were mixed. The embrace was a sort of divine worship, and yet a crime as well. Too much of the memory of my mother, too much of the memory of Max Demian was contained in the form which embraced me. The embrace seemed repulsive to my sentiment of reverence, yet I felt happy. I often awoke out of this dream with a deep feeling of contentment, often with the fear of death and a tormenting conscience as if I were guilty of a terrible sin. Alright, kid is just actually confused at this point. It happens, but it was only gradually and unconsciously that I realized the connection between this mental picture and the hint which had come to me from outside concerning the God of whom I was in search. However, this connection became closer and more intimate, and I began to feel that precisely in this dream, this presentiment, I was invoking Abraxas, rapture and horror, man and woman, the most sacred things and the most abominable interwoven, the darkest guilt with the most tender innocence. Such was the dream picture of my love. Such also was Abraxas. Love was no longer a dark animal impulse, as I had felt with considerable anxiety in the beginning. Neither was it a pious, spiritualized form of worship any longer. Such as I had bestowed upon the picture of Beatrice. It was both and yet much more. It was the image of an angel and of Satan, man and woman in one, human being and animal, the highest good and lowest evil. It was my destiny, it seemed, that I should experience this in my own life. I had longed for it and was afraid of it. I followed it in my dreams and took to flight before it. But it was always there. It was always standing over me. The next spring, I was to leave school and go to some university to study. Where and what, I knew not. Okay, yeah, he's definitely one of those sorts. Very relatable, but... yeah. Hang on one sec. Zoe's got it in her mind that she absolutely must bury her business in the litter box. Never mind that she's not swiping at the litter. No. The on-ramp. Making a bit of a racket. I'm not sure if it's being picked up or not. Zoe! She'll decide she's done burying her business before long, I'm sure. One of these days I'll invest in a litter robot or something to take the need for this out of her little hands. It's similar to what's going on here. It kind of depends on where about in the box the logistics of things are. Where were we? It was only gradually and unconsciously that I realized the connection between this mental picture and the hint which had come to me from outside concerning the God of whom I was in search. However, this connection became closer and more intimate, and I began to feel... oh, no, we jumped a whole paragraph. Dagnabbit. The next spring I was to leave school, and go to some university to study, where and what I knew not. A small mustache grew on my lip. I was a grown man, and yet completely hopeless and aimless. Relatable. Only one thing was firm. The voice in me. The dream picture. I felt it my duty to follow this guidance blindly. But it was difficult, and daily I was on the point of revolting. Perhaps I was mad. I often used to think perhaps I was not as other men. But I could do everything the others did. With a little pains and industry, I could read Plato. I could solve a trigonometrical... I can't say it, but I could solve a trigonometrical problem or work out a chemical analysis. Only one thing I could not do. Discover the dark, concealed aim within me and make up my mind, as others did. Others who knew well enough whether they wanted to be professors or judges, doctors or artists. They knew what career to follow and what advantages they would gain by it. But I was not like that. Perhaps I would be like them someday. But how was I to know? Perhaps I should have to seek and seek for years, and would make nothing of myself, would attain no end. Perhaps I should attain an end, but it might be wicked, dangerous, terrible. I wanted only to try to live in obedience to the promptings which came from my true self. Why was that so very difficult? Yeah, he's definitely working through it. We're seeing, like, all the different stages of coming of age. Like, the transition from boyhood to adolescent. The transition from adolescent to, rebellious youth. From rebellious youth to lost transitionary. And now just, like, edging up on manhood, but completely lost in the sauce. I often made the attempt to paint the powerful love figure of my dream, but I never succeeded. If I had been successful, I would have sent the picture to Demian. Where was he? I knew not. I only knew there was a bond of union between us. When should I see him again? Emil might be a little bit obsessed. The pleasant tranquility of those weeks and months of the Beatrice period was long since gone. I thought at that time I had reached a haven and had found peace, but it was ever so. Scarcely did I begin to adapt myself to circumstances, scarcely had a dream done me good when it faded again. In vain to complain, I now lived in a fire of unstilled desires, of tense expectation, which often rendered me completely wild and mad. I frequently saw before me the picture of my dream mistress with extraordinary clearness, much more clearly than I saw my own hand. I spoke to it, wept over it, cursed it. I called it mother and knelt before it in tears. I called it my beloved. I felt its ripe kiss of fulfilled desire. I called it devil and whore, vampire and murderer. It invited me to the tenderest dreams of love and to the most horrible abominations. Nothing was too good and precious for it, nothing too bad and vile. All right, yeah, Emil might have gone around the bend a little bit on this one. I passed the whole of that winter in a state of inward tumult, difficult to describe. I had long been accustomed to loneliness. That did not depress me. I lived with Demian, with the hawk, with the picture of my big dream figure, which was my fate and my mistress. It sufficed to live in close communion with those things, since they opened up a large and broad perspective leading to Abraxas. But I was not able to summon up these dreams, these thoughts at will. I could not invest them in colors as I pleased. They came of themselves, taking possession of me, governing me and shaping my life. I was so secure in so far as the outside world was concerned. I was afraid of no one. My schoolfellows had learned to recognize that and observed a secret respect towards me, which often caused me to smile. When I wished, I could penetrate most of them with a look, thereby surprising them occasionally. Only I seldom or never wanted to do this. It was my own self which occupied my attention, always myself, and yet I longed ardently to live a bit of real life, to give something of myself to the world, to enter into contact and battle with it. Sometimes, as I wandered through the streets in the evening, and could not, through restlessness, return home before midnight, I thought to myself, now I cannot fail to meet my beloved. I shall overtake her at the next corner. She will call to me from the next window. Sometimes all this seemed to torture me unbearably, and I was quite prepared to take my own life some day. Excuse me? Emile. At that time, I found a particular refuge, by chance, as one says. But really, such happenings cannot be attributed to chance. When a person is in need of something and the necessary happens, this is not due to chance, but to himself. His own desire leads him compellingly to the object of which he stands in need. Two or three times during my wanderings through the streets, I had heard the strains of an organ coming from a little church in the suburbs without. However, stopping to listen, the next time I passed by the church, I heard it again, and recognized that Bach was being played. I went to the door, which I found to be locked. As the street was practically empty, I sat down on a curbstone close to the church, turned up the collar of my coat, and listened. It was not a large organ, but a good one nevertheless. Whoever was playing played wonderfully well, almost like a virtuoso, but with a peculiar, highly personal expression of will and perseverance, which seemed to make the music ring out like a prayer. I had the feeling that the man who was playing knew a treasure was shut up in the music, and he struggled and tapped and knocked to get at the treasure, as if his life depended on his finding it. In the technical sense, I do not understand very much about music, but this form of the soul's expression I have from my childhood intuitively understood. I feel music is something which I can comprehend without initiation. Emile, brother, wee bit big-headed of you there, but you know what, sure. The organist next played something modern. It might have been Rager. The church was almost completely dark. Only a very narrow beam of light shone through the window nearest to me. I waited until the end, and then walked up and down till the organist came out. He was still a young man, though older than myself, robust and thick-set. He walked quickly, taking powerful strides, but as if forcing the pace against his will. Many an evening thereafter I sat before the church, or walked up and down. Once I found the door open, and for half an hour I sat shivering and happy inside, whilst the organist played in the organ loft by the dim gaslight. Of the music he played, I heard not only what he himself put into it. There seemed also to be a secret coherence in his repertory. Each piece seemed to be the continuation of the one preceding. Everything he played was pious, expressing faith and devotion, but not pious like churchgoers and clergymen, but like pilgrims and beggars of the Middle Ages, pious with a reckless surrender to a world feeling which was superior to all confessions of faith. He frequently played music by the pre-Bach composers, and old Italian music, and all the pieces said the same thing, all expressed what the musician had in his soul, longing. A longing to identify oneself with the world, and to tear oneself free again, listening to the workings of one's own dark soul, an orgy of devotion and lively curiosity of the wonderful. I once secretly followed the organist as he left the church. All right, now he's fallen to be a stalker. Okay, cool. Good on you, Emile. He continued his way to the outskirts of the town and entered a little tavern. I could not resist the temptation to go in after him. For the first time, I had a clear view of him. He sat at the table in the corner of the little room, a black felt hat on his head, a measure of wine before him, and his face was just as I had expected it to be. It was ugly and somewhat uncouth, with the look of a seeker and of an eccentric, obstinate and strong-willed, with a soft and childish mouth. The expression of what was strong and manly lay in the eyes and forehead. On the lower half of the face sat a look of gentleness and immaturity. Oh, hang on. We're having issues already. Thank you very much, Internet. Yeah, this one's kind of a doozy. I'm not having any issues with connectivity in general. Speed is good. I'm not getting half of what I paid for, but what else is new? But probably one of the upstream hops before it gets out to the world at large, but it is what it is there. Not really a whole lot of control I can have there. We are up to about, almost 3% of the frames have dropped now, so that's fantastic. Okay, really. Calm down now. OBS, Internet, Comcast, gods of DNS, someone. Oop, it might be improving. Back up to green according to OBS. No more drop frames. We'll give things a little bit to catch up. Okay, seem to be caught up on YouTube's side. And we'll see whether Twitch will coincide. It doesn't look too bad. Alright. Let's go ahead and jump back into it, and we'll see whether or not it will keep up, because so far we're looking good. The expression of what was strong and manly lay in the eyes and forehead. On the lower half of the face sat a look of gentleness and immaturity, rather effeminate and showing a lack of self-mastery. The chin indicated a boyish indecision, as if in contradiction with the eyes and forehead. I liked the dark brown eyes, full of pride and hostility. Silently, I took my place opposite him. There was no one else in the tavern. He glared at me as if he wished to chase me away. Nevertheless, I maintained my position, and looking at him unflinchingly, until, at last, he growled testily, "What the deuce are you staring at me for? Do you want something of me?" I don't want anything, I said. You've already given me much. He wrinkled his forehead. Ah, you're a music enthusiast, are you? I think it's disgusting to go mad over music. I did not let myself be intimidated. I have so often listened to your playing there in the church, I said, but I don't want to bother you. I thought, perhaps, I should discover something in you, something special. I don't know exactly what, but please don't mind me. I can listen to you in the church. Why? I always lock the door. Just lately you forgot, and I sat inside. Otherwise I stand outside or sit on the curbstone. Is that so? Another time you can come inside. It's warmer. You've simply got to knock on the door, but loudly, and not while I'm playing. Now, what did you want to say? But you're quite young, apparently a schoolboy or a student. Are you a musician? No, I like music, but only the kind you play. Absolute music, where one feels that someone is trying to fathom heaven and hell. I like music so much, I think, because it is not concerned with morals. Everything else is a question of morals, I think. And I am looking for something different. Whatever has been concerned with morals has caused me only suffering. I want to express myself properly, but do you know that there must be a God who is at the same time God and devil? There must have been one, I have heard so. The organist pushed back his broad hat and shook the dark hair from his forehead. He looked at me penetratingly and bent forward, his face towards me over the table. Softly and tensely he questioned, "What's the name of the god of whom you are talking?" Unfortunately, I know practically nothing about him, really, only his name. His name's Abraxas. The musician looked distrustfully around, as if someone might be eavesdropping. Then he bent towards me and said in a whisper, "I thought so. Who are you?" "I'm a student from the school." "How do you know about Abraxas?" "By chance." He thumped the table so that his wine spilled over. "Chance! Don't talk about talking nonsense, young man. One doesn't know of Abraxas by chance, mark you. I will tell you something more of him. I know a little about him." He ceased talking and pushed back his chair. I looked at him expectantly, and he made a grimace. "Not here. Another time. There, take these." He dug his hand into the pocket of his overcoat, which he had not taken off, and pulled out a couple of roasted chestnuts, which he threw to me. I said nothing. I took and ate them, and was very contented. Oh yes, pocket chestnuts. The pocket chestnuts from a strange musician that might be a cultist. Don't worry about it. "Where?" he whispered after a while. "How do you know about him?" I did not hesitate to tell him. I was lonely and perplexed, I related. I called to mind a friend of former years who, I think, knows a great deal. I had painted something, a bird coming out of a terrestrial globe. I sent this to him. After a time, when I had begun to lose hope of a reply, a piece of paper fell into my hands. On it was written, "The bird fights its way out of the egg. The egg is the world. Whoever will be born must destroy a world. The bird flies to God. The name of the god is Abraxas." He answered nothing. We peeled our chestnuts and ate them, and drank our wine. "Shall we have another drink?" he asked. Thanks, no. I don't care much for drinking." He laughed, somewhat disappointedly. "As you wish. I am different. I'm staying here. You can go now." Yeah, Emil is not fond of drinking in the same way of someone who has rolled down a hill in a tire after drinking a fifth of Jack Daniels is no longer fond of whiskey. The next time I saw him, after the organ recital, he was not very communicative. He conducted me through an old street to an inn, to an old stately house, and upstairs into a large, somewhat gloomy and untidy room where, besides a piano, there was nothing to indicate that its occupant was a musician. Instead, a huge bookcase and writing table gave the room a somewhat scholarly air. "What a lot of books you have," I said appreciatively. "Part of them belongs to the library of my father, with whom I live. Yes, young man, I live with my father and mother, but I cannot introduce you to them, as I and my acquaintances meet with but scant respect at home. I am a prodigal son, you see. My father is very much looked up to. He's a well-known clergyman and a preacher in this town, and I, to let you know at once, am his talented and promising son, who, however, is guilty of many backslidings, and, to a certain extent, mad, studying theology, and deserted this worthy faculty shortly before my final examination, although really I am still in the same line, as far as concerns my private studies. For me, it is still of the highest importance and interest what sort of gods people have invented for themselves at various times. I am a musician into the bargain, and shall soon get a post as an organist, I think. Then I shall be in the church again." Alright, yeah, this guy is very much the prototypical pastor's kid. If you know, you know. I glanced over the backs of the books and found Greek, Latin, Hebrew titles as far as I could see by the feeble light of the lamp on the table. My acquaintance, meanwhile, had taken up a position on the floor in the dark by the wall. "Come here," he called after a while. "We'll practice a little philosophy. That means keeping one's mouth shut, lying on one's stomach and thinking." He struck a match and applied it to the paper and wood in the fireplace, in front of which he was lying. The flame leapt up. He poked and blew the fire with great skill. I lay down near him on the ragged carpet. He stared into the flames, which drew my attention as well, and we lay silent for perhaps a whole hour, stretched out in front of the flaring wood fire. We watched it flame and roar, die down and flicker up again, until finally it settled down into a subdued glow. "Fire worship was not by any means the silliest form of worship invented," he murmured without looking up. Those were the only words spoken. With staring eyes, I gazed into the fire. Lulled by the tranquility of the room, I sank in dreams, seeing shapes in the smoke and pictures in the ashes. Once I started up. My companion had thrown a little bit of rosin into the glow. A little slender flame shot up. I saw in it the bird with the gold hawk's head. In the glow which died away in the fireplace, golden glittering threads wove themselves together into a net, letters and pictures, memories of faces, of animals, of plants, of worms and serpents. When I woke from my reveries and looked across at my companion, he was absorbed, staring at the ashes with the fixed gaze of a fanatic, his chin in his hands. "I must go now," I said softly. "Well, go then. Goodbye." He did not get up, and as the lamp had gone out, I had to feel my way across the dark room, through dark corridors and down the stairs, and so out of the enchanted old dwelling. Once in the street, I stopped and looked up at the house. In not one of the windows was a light burning. A little brass plate shone in the gleam of the gas lamp before the door. "Pistorius, Vicar," I read thereon. As I sat in my little room after supper, I remembered that I had learned nothing about Abraxas, or anything else from Pistorius. We had scarcely exchanged 10 words, but I was quite contented with the visit I had paid him, and he had promised to play next time an exquisite piece of organ music, a Passacaglia, by Buxtehude. The name Pistorius sounds familiar. Why does that sound familiar? Ah, Oscar Pistorius. Yep, that makes sense. Rather. Yeah. There's things involved there now, yeah. Yeah. Without my having realized it, the organist Pistorius had given me a first lesson as we lay on the floor in the front of the fireplace of his melancholy hermit's room. Staring into the fire had done me good. It had confirmed and set in an activity tendencies which I had always had, but had never really followed. Gradually, and in part, I saw light on the subject. When quite a child, I had from time to time the propensity to watch bizarre forms of nature, not observing them closely, but simply surrendering myself to their peculiar magic, absorbed by the contemplation of their curling shapes. Long, dignified tree roots, colored veins in stone, flecks of oil floating on water, flaws in glass, all things of a similar nature, had had great charm for me at that time. Above all, water and fire, smoke, clouds, dust, and especially the little circulating colored specks, which I saw when I closed my eyes. In the days following my first visit to Pistorius, this began to come back to me. I noticed that I was indebted solely to staring into the open fire for a certain strength and pleasure, for the increase in my depth of feeling which I had felt since. It was curiously beneficial and enriching, dreaming and staring into the fire. Emil seems to be on a trip. Maybe a certain fungal trip might be beneficial, but for the time being, he'll just make do with staring at strange nature and fire and just going with the flow. To the few experiences I had gained on the road to the attainment of my proper ends in life, I was added this new one. The contemplation of such shapes, the surrendering of oneself to these irrational, twisting, odd forms of nature, engenders in us a feeling of the harmony of our inner being with the will which brought forth these shapes. We soon feel the temptation to look upon them as our own creations, as if made by our own moods. We see the boundary between ourselves and nature waver and vanish. We learn to know the state of mind by outside impressions or by inward. In no way so simply and so easily as by this practice do we discover to what a great extent we are creators. To what a great extent our souls have part in the continual creation of the world. Or rather, it is the same indivisible Godhead, which is active in us and in nature. If the outside world fell in ruins, one of us would be capable of building it up again. For mountain and stream, tree and leaf, root and blossom, all that is shaped by nature lies modeled in us, comes from the soul, whose essence is eternity, of whose essence we are ignorant, but which is revealed to us, for the most part, as love force and creative power. Yeah, we've transitioned from a coming-of-age story to a Grateful Dead concert. Many years later, I found this observation confirmed in a book, one of Leonardo da Vinci's, who in one passage remarks how good and deeply moving it is to look at a wall on which many people have spat. He felt the same sensation before those spots on the wet wall as Pistorius and I before the fire. Excuse me, Leo? What? What? At our next meeting, the organist enlightened me still further on the subject. We confine our personality within much too narrow bounds. We count as composing our person only that which distinguishes us as individuals, only that which we recognize as irregular, but we are made up from the entire world stock, each one of us. And just as in our body is displayed the genealogical table of development back to the fish stage and still further, so we have accumulated in our souls all the experiences through which a human soul has ever lived. All the gods and devils which have ever been, whether those of the Greeks or Chinese or Zulus, are all in us, are there as potentialities, as desires, as starting points. If all mankind died out, with the exception of a single, moderately gifted child,
would not enjoy the slightest instruction. So would this child rediscover the whole process of things. It would be able to produce gods, demons, paradises, the commandments and prohibitions, Old and New Testaments, everything.
Well and good, I objected. But then, what does the worth of the individual consist of? Why do we continue to strive if everything has already been achieved in us?
Stop! Exclaimed Pistorius vehemently. There's a great difference between whether one merely carries the world in oneself, or whether one is conscious of that as well. A madman can have ideas which remind one of Plato, and a pious little boy in Moravian boarding school will recreate in his thought profound mythological ideas which occur in the Gnostics or in Zoroaster. But he does not realize it. He is a tree or a stone at best, an animal, as long as he does not know it. But when the first spark of this knowledge glimmers in him, he becomes a man. You will not consider all the two-legged creatures who walk out there in the street as human beings, simply because they walk erect and carry their young 9 months in the womb. Look how many of them are fish or sheep, worms or leeches, how many are ants or bees. Well, in reach of them are the possibilities of becoming human creatures. But only when they feel this, it is only when, if even in part, they learn to make them conscious. These potentialities become theirs.
Okay, cool. So Pistorius is introducing Emil to the concept of sheeple. Thank you very much. I don't think our young man really needed this introduction. No. I'd rather you not lead him astray. Do not red pill our protagonist, Pistorius. Do not do it! Our conversations were somewhat after this style. They seldom taught me anything completely new. Anything absolutely surprising. But all, even the most banal, but all, I always get hung up on which way is the better way to say that. Even the most banal, hit like a light, persistent hammer. A stroke on the same point in me. All helped in my development. All helped to peel off skins, to break up eggshells, and after each talk, I held my head somewhat higher. I was more sure of myself until my yellow bird pushed his beautiful bird of prey crest through the ruins of the world shell. Yes, we are sharing thoughts again. Yes, it happens. We frequently related our dreams to one another. Pistorius knew how to interpret them. A curious example comes to my mind. I dreamed I was able to fly. I was flung through the air, so to speak, impelled by a great force over which I had not the mastery. The sensation of this flight was exhilarating, but soon changed to fear, as I saw myself snatched up involuntarily to risky heights. There I made the saving discovery that I could control my rise and fall by arresting my breath and by breathing again. Pistorius interpreted it as follows.
The spring, which sent you up into the air, is the great property of mankind, which everyone possesses. It is the feeling of close relationship with the springs of every force, but it soon causes anxiety. It is cursedly dangerous. For that reason, most people willingly renounce flying, preferring to walk according to prescribed laws along the footpath. But not you. You fly higher, as befits an intelligent fellow. And behold, you make a wonderful discovery there, namely, you gradually get the mastery over the impelling force. In other words, you acquire a fine little force of your own, an instrument, a rudder. That is splendid. Without that, one goes floating into the air without any will of one's own. Madmen, for instance, do that. They have deeper presentiments than the people on the footpath, but they have no key and no rudder. They fall whistling through the air down into the fathomless depths. But you, Sinclair, you manage all right. And how, pray? You probably don't even know. You manage with a new instrument, with a breath regulator. And now you can see that your soul isn't really personal at the bottom. I mean that you didn't invent this regulator. It isn't new. It is alone. It has existed for thousands of years. It is a balancing organ fish have, the air bladder. Even today, we actually still have a very few rare kinds of fish whose air bladder is at the same time a sort of lung, and on occasion can use it to breathe with. In your dream, you made use of your lungs in exactly the same way as these fish do their air bladder. He even brought me a volume on zoology, and showed me the original drawings of these ancient fish.
and with a peculiar thrill, I felt an organ of early evolutionary epochs functioning in me. There's a quick ban there, and also a reminder that Pistorius is kind of a nut job. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. Alright, that brings us to the end of Chapter 5. So we've got a new character here, a new influence on Emil. Rather a circular influence. They're feeding off each other. The fact that they both are familiar with the idea of Abraxas and in their own little lost in their own minds is interesting. At first I was almost expecting the organist to be Demian, to be coming back into connection with Emil, but no, this seems to be someone entirely new, a secondary influence and mentor for Emil. But we'll have to see how far that develops and goes on and carries on. All right, we went a little bit over in our first hour, so let's go ahead and take a short break. Stand up, stretch your legs, do the needful. I've been in it too long. Please do the needful. Anyway, we'll be back in just a few minutes, where we'll continue and try and get through probably one more chapter tonight. And I think, if I'm judging this right, we should land pretty neatly on the end of this chapter around our typical end point. So, be back in just a few minutes, and we'll be back. I'm just talking myself in circles. Get a drink. I could use one. All right, we are back. Had to take a moment to play home bartender. There was a pressing need, a great need, and it just so happened to have some fresh Diet Coke. So let's get this updated. There's nothing wrong with a classic. Let's get this moved over just so it's a little bit more snugged in the corner. It is... I really should see if I can right side justify this so it will expand and move on its own. It's by default left side justified, which was great when it was over on the left. But, yeah. Yeah, that was kind of my thoughts. When we got firmly and strongly into the, well over the edge, and started to feel like early 1900s Joe Rogan was with us in the room, I needed a stiff drink. All right, let's go ahead and continue. We've got one more chapter that I want to get through tonight. This is about of a length with what we've just read, so we might run a little bit over tonight, but it's the weekend. So, resuming now with chapter 6. Jacob wrestles with God. Who's Jacob? I cannot relate in brief all that I learned from the singular musician Pistorius about Abraxas. The most important result of his teaching was that I was made a further step forward on the road to self-realization. I was then about 18 years old. I was a young man, rather out of the ordinary, precocious in 100 things, and 100 other things backward and helpless. When, from time to time, I used to compare myself with others, I was often proud and conceited, but just as frequently I felt depressed and humiliated. I had often looked upon myself as a genius, often as half mad. I could not share the pleasures and life of the fellows of my age, and often I heaped reproaches on myself and was consumed with cares, thinking I was hopelessly cut off from them, and that life was closed to me. You know what, I hadn't thought of the biblical one. I should have, absolutely, considering all the contexts that are at play here. And also, Emil, kid, we are deep in the throes of the angst of a slow maturation here. Pistorius himself, full-grown and eccentric, taught me to preserve my courage and my self-esteem. In constantly finding some value in my words, in my dreams, in the play of my imagination, and in my ideas, in taking them seriously and discussing them, he set me an example.
"You've told me," he said, "that you like music because it is not moral. Well, all right, but you should be no moralist yourself. You should not compare yourself with others. If nature had created you to be a bat, you ought not want to make yourself into an ostrich. You often consider yourself as singular. You reproach yourself with going ways different from most people. You must get out of that habit. Look in the fire, look at the clouds, and see, and as soon as you have presentiments, and the voices of your soul begin to speak, yield to them. And don't first ask what the opinion of your master or your father would be, or whether they would be pleasing to some god or other. One spoils oneself that way. In doing that, one treads the common road, becomes a fossil. Sinclair, my dear fellow, the name of our god Abraxas is Abraxas. He is God and he is Satan. He has the light and the dark world in him. Abraxas has no objection to urge against any of your ideas or against any of your dreams. Never forget that. But he deserts you if you ever become blameless and normal. He deserts you and seeks out another pot in order to cook his ideas therein."
He had me in the first half there. He was giving pretty good advice, and then the nut job came out. Of all my dreams, that dark love dream recurred most frequently. Often, have I dreamed of it. Often I stepped onto the crest with the bird on it into our house and wished to draw my mother to me. But instead of her, I found I was embracing the tall, manly, half-motherly woman, of whom I was afraid, and yet to whom I was drawn by a most ardent desire. And I could never relate this dream to my friend. I kept it back, although I had opened my heart to him on everything else. It was my secret, my retreat, my refuge. When I was depressed, I used to beg Pistorius to play me the Passacaglia of old Buxtehude. I sat in the dark church in the evening, engrossed in this singularly intimate music, which seems to be hearkening to itself, as if entirely self-absorbed. Each time it did me good and made me more ready to follow the promptings of my inward self. Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. They're realizing that, yeah, something's not quite right. But let's ignore the obvious. Let's ignore the probable cause. No. Let's do this really crazy thing that obviously must be the root problem. No. Sometimes we stayed a while in the church after the strains of the organ had died away. We sat and watched the feeble light shine through the high lancet window. The light seemed to lose itself in the body of the church.
"It sounds funny," said Pistorius, "that I once did theology and almost became a parson. But it was only an error in form that I committed. To be a priest, that is my vocation and my aim. Only I was too easily satisfied, and gave myself to the service of Jehovah before ever I knew Abraxas. Aha! Every religion is beautiful. Religion is a soul. It is all one whether you take a communion as a Christian or whether you make a pilgrimage to Mecca."
Okay, well, that's a nice position, I suppose. Then, really, you might have been a clergyman, I suggested.
"No, Sinclair, no. I should have had to have lied in that case. Our religion is so practiced, as if it were none. It is carried on as if it were a work of the understanding. A Catholic I could well be, if need were, but a Protestant clergyman, no. There are two kinds of genuine believers, I know such, who hold gladly to the literal interpretation. I cannot say to them that for me Christ was not a mere person, but a hero, a myth, a wonderful shadow picture, in which mankind sees itself painted on the wall of eternity. And what should I find to say to the other sort? Those who go to church to hear wise words, to fulfill a duty in order to leave nothing undone, etc. Convert them, you think, perhaps? That's not at all my idea. The priest does not wish to convert. He only wishes to live among the believers, among those of his own kind, so that through him they may find expression for that feeling out of which we make our gods."
He broke off. Then he continued,
"Our new faith, for which we have now chosen the name of Abraxas, is beautiful, my friend. It is the best we have. But it is still nestling. Its wings have not yet grown. Alas, a lonely religion. It is not yet the true one. It must become an affair of many. It must have a cult and orgy, feasts and mysteries."
There he goes again. He was sunk in reflection. Can one not celebrate mysteries alone? Or in a very small circle? I asked hesitatingly.
"Yes, one can," he nodded. "I have been celebrating them for a long time past. I have celebrated cults for which I should have been imprisoned for years in a convict station, if they had been found out. But I know it is not the right thing."
He suddenly clapped me on the shoulder, making me jump.
"Young friend," he said impressively, "you also have mysteries. I know that you must have dreams of which you make no mention to me. I don't wish to know them, but I tell you, live them. These dreams, play your destined part, build altars to them. It is not yet the perfect religion, but it is a way. Whether you and I and a few other people will one day renew the world remains to be seen, but we must renew it daily within us. Otherwise we are of no account. Think over it. You are 18, Sinclair. You don't go with loose women. You must have love dreams, desires. Perhaps they are such that you are frightened about them. They are the best you have, believe me. I've lost a great deal by doing violence to these love dreams when I was your age. One should not do that. When one knows of Abraxas, one should do that no more. We should fear nothing. We should hold nothing forbidden which the soul in us desires.
Frightened, I objected. But you can't do everything which comes into your mind. You can't murder a man because you can't tolerate him. He pressed closer to me.
There are cases where you can. Only generally it's a mistake. I don't mean that you can simply do everything which comes into your mind, no, but you shouldn't do injury to those ideas in which there is sense. You shouldn't banish them from your mind or moralize about them. Instead of getting oneself crucified or crucifying others, one can solemnly drink wine out of a cup, thinking the while on the mystery of sacrifice. One can, without such actions, treat one's impulses and one's so-called temptations with esteem and love. Then you discover their meaning, and they all have meaning. Next time the idea takes you to do something really mad and sinful, Sinclair, if you would like to murder someone or to do something dreadfully obscene, then think a moment. That it is Abraxas who is indulging in a play of fancy. The man you would like to kill is never really a Mr. So-and-so. That is really only a disguise. When we hate a man, we hate in him something which resides in us ourselves. What is not in us does not move us.
That's a less awful than expected turn there. Never had Pistorius said anything to me which went home so deeply as this. I could not reply. But what moved me most singularly and most powerfully was that Pistorius, in this conversation, had struck the same note as Demian, whose words I had carried in my mind for years and years past. They knew nothing of one another, and both said to me the same thing.
The things we see, said Pistorius softly, are the same things which are in us. There is no reality except that which we have in ourselves. For that reason, most people live so unreally. Because they hold the impressions of the outside world for real, and their own world in themselves never enters into their consideration. You can be happy like that, but if once you know of the other, then you no longer have the choice to go the way most people go. Sinclair, the road for most people is easy. Ours is hard. Let us go.
I didn't think Pistorius would have so many lines, so much dialogue, when I chose his voice. There's always the risk we take. A few days later, after I had on 2 occasions waited for him in vain, I met him late one evening in the street. He came stumbling round a corner, blown along by the cold night wind. He was very drunk. I did not like to call him. He passed by without noticing me, staring in front of him with strange, glowing eyes, as though he were moving in obedience to a dark call from the unknown. I followed him down one street. He drifted along as if drawn by an invisible wire, with the swaying gait of a fanatic, or like a ghost. Sadly, I went home, to the unsolved problems of my dreams. Thus he renews the world in himself, I thought, and felt instantly that my thought was base and moral. What did I know of his dreams? Perhaps in his intoxication he was going a surer way than in my anxiety. In the intervals between lessons, it struck me once or twice that a boy who had never before attracted my notice was hovering about in my proximity. It was a little, weak-looking, slim youngster with reddish-blonde, thin hair, who had something peculiar in his look and behavior. One evening, as I came home, he was on the watch for me in the street. He let me pass by, then walked behind me, and remained standing in front of the door of the house. "Can I do anything for you?" I asked.
"I only want to speak to you," he said timidly. "Be good enough to come a few steps with me."
I followed him, observing that he was deeply excited and full of expectation. His hands trembled.
"Are you a spiritualist?"
he asked quite suddenly. "No." "Now, I said, laughing. "Not a bit. How did you get hold of that idea?"
But you are a theosophist."
"No, again."
Oh, please don't be so reserved. I feel with absolute certainty that there's something singular about you. It is in your eyes. I thought it certain you communed with spirits. I am not asking out of curiosity, Sinclair. No, I am myself a seeker, and I am so lonely."
"Tell me, then," I encouraged him. "I know absolutely nothing of ghosts. I live in my dreams. That is what you have felt about me. Other people live in dreams as well, but not in their own. That is the difference."
"Yes, perhaps so," he whispered. "Only it depends on the sort of dreams you live in. Have you ever heard of white magic?"
I had to admit my ignorance.
"It's when you get to learn to get the mastery over yourself. You could be immortal, and have magical powers as well. Have you ever practiced such experiments?"
On my evincing curiosity with regard to those practices, he was mysteriously silent. But when I turned to go, he burst out in explanation.
"For example, when I go to sleep, or when I wish to concentrate my thoughts, or I do such exercises, I think of something or other, a word, for instance, or a name, or a geometrical figure. And I think it into myself as strongly as I can. I try to get it into my head until I feel it is there. Then I think it in my neck, and so on, until I am quite full of it."
"Full of it, indeed."
"Then my thoughts are concentrated, and nothing more can disturb my repose."
I understood to a certain degree what he meant, yet I felt he had something else in his mind. He was oddly excited and hasty. I tried to make the questions easy for him, and he soon gave me an indication of what immediately concerned him.
"You are also consonant?"
he asked me anxiously. "What do you mean by that? Do you mean it from the sex point of view?"
Yes. I've been continent for 2 years, since I knew of what I've told you. Before that, I practiced device. You know what? You've never been with a woman, then?"
"No," I said. "I haven't found the right one."
"But if you should find her, when you consider the right one, then would you sleep with her?"
"Yes, naturally, if she had nothing against it," I said with some scorn.
"Oh, then you are on a false track. One can only perfect one's inner forces if one remains entirely continent. I've done it for 2 whole years. 2 years and a little more than a month. It's so hard. Often I can scarcely hold out any longer."
Jesus Christ. Listen, now. I don't believe that continency is so terribly important.
"I know," he parried. "They all say that, but I did not expect to hear it from you. Whoever will go to the highest spiritual way must remain pure unconditionally."
"Well, then, do so. But I don't understand why one man should be purer than another, because he represses his sex instincts. Or can you switch off all sexual matters from your thoughts and dreams?" He looked despairingly at me.
"No, that's just it. God, yet it must be. At night I have dreams which I couldn't relate even to myself. Terrible dreams. Terrible."
I recollected what Pistorius had said to me, but however much I felt his words to be right, I could not pass them on. I could not give advice which did not result from my own experience, advice the observance of which I did not yet feel myself equal to. I was silent, and felt humiliated that someone should come to me for counsel when I had none to give.
"I've tried everything,"
wailed Naur beside me.
"I've done all that a man can do. With cold water, with snow, with gymnastic exercises and running, but all that doesn't help a bit. Each night I wake up out of dreams on which I dare not think, and most dreadful of all, I am by degrees losing everything that I had gained spiritually. It is almost impossible for me any longer to concentrate my thoughts or to lull myself to sleep. Often I lie awake the whole night through. I should not be able to bear much longer. Finally, When I can carry on the struggle no further, when I give in and make myself impure again, I shall be worse than all the others who have never struggled against it. You understand that, don't you?
This kid. I nodded, but could say nothing to the point. He began to bore me.
I was horrified at myself, because his obvious need and despair made no deep impression on me.
My only sentiment was, I can't help you.
You know, nothing that would help me? He asked at last, exhausted, and said, Nothing at all. There must be some way. How do you manage?
I cannot tell you anything, Noah. People can't help one another in this case. No one has helped me either. You must think of something yourself, and you must obey the prompting, which really comes from your own nature. There is nothing else. If you cannot find yourself, you won't find any spirits either. Disappointed and suddenly become dumb, the little fellow looked at me. Then his look suddenly glowed with hate. He made a grimace at me and cried with rage, You're a nice sort of saint! You have your vices well, I know. You pretend to wisdom, and secretly you stick in the same filth as I and all of us. You swine like myself. We are all swine. I went away and left him standing there. He made 2, 3 steps in my direction, then he stopped, turned round, and ran away. I felt sick from a feeling of pity and horror. I could not get rid of the feeling until I got home to my little room, and, placing my few pictures before me, I surrendered myself up with passionate fervor to my dreams. My dreams came back at once. The dream of the front door and crest, of Mother and the strange woman, and I saw the features of the woman so very clearly that I began to draw a picture the same evening. In a few days this drawing was finished, painted in as if unconsciously in dreamy quarter-of-an-hour periods. In the evening I hung it on the wall, put the reading lamp in front of it, and stood before it as before a spirit with whom I had to fight until victory should be decided one way or the other. It was a face similar to the former, resembling my friend Demian. In certain traits, even resembling myself. One eye stood perceptibly higher than the other. The look passed over me, sunk in a staring gaze full of destiny. I stood before it. Such was my inward exertion that I became cold to the marrow. I questioned the picture, I abused it, I caressed it, I prayed to it, I called it mother, I called it beloved, I called it strumpet and whore, I called it Abraxas. Meanwhile, the words of Pistorius crossed my mind. Or of Demian. I could not recollect on what occasion they had been spoken, but I thought I heard them again. They were the words of Jacob, wrestling with the angel of God. I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. Okay, yeah, biblical Jacob. The painted face in the lamplight changed at each appeal. It was bright and shining, was black and gloomy. It closed pale lids over dead eyes, opened them again, and flashed a burning look. It was woman, man, girl, and a little child. An animal vanished to a speck, was again tall and clear. At last, in response to a strong inward prompting, I closed my eyes and saw the picture inwardly in me. Stronger and more powerful, I wished to kneel down before it, but it was so much within me that I could separate it from myself no more. It seemed as if it had entirely identified itself with me. Then I heard a loud, confused roar, as of a spring storm. I trembled in an indescribably new feeling of fear and excitement. Stars darted before me and died out. Recollections, even of the first forgotten years of my childhood, of a time further back still, of a pre-existence and the early stages of existence, pressed through me. But the recollections which seemed to piece together my life's whole history, even to its most secret details, did not cease with yesterday and today. They went farther, mirrored the future, tearing me away from day to day, changing me into new forms of life, of which the pictures were very bright and blinding, but none of them could I call up a just image later. In the night, I woke up out of a deep sleep. I was dressed and lying transversely across the bed. I struck a light, feeling that I must try to remember something important that had happened. I knew nothing of the hours just past. I turned on the light, and recollection came back gradually. I looked for the picture. It was not hanging on the wall, neither was it lying on the table. I thought confusedly that I must have burned it, or it was a dream, that I'd burned it in my hands and had eaten the ashes. A great inquietude convulsed me and drove me forth. I put on my hat, went out of the house and down the street as if under coercion. I walked and walked through streets and squares as if blown along by a storm. I listened in front of the gloomy church of my friend, searched in obedience to a blind impulse without knowing what I was looking for. I went through a suburb where brothels stood. Here and there a light was still shining. Further on stood new buildings and brick heaps covered in part with gray snow. I went on through this wilderness, driven forward by a strange impulse, like a man walking in a dream. The thought of the new building in my native town crossed my mind. That building to which my tormentor Cromer had drawn me to settle accounts with him in the gray night. A similar building stood there in front of me, its black doorway yawning wide. I was drawn towards it, but wanted to shun it, and stumbled over sand and rubbish. The impulse was stronger than I had to go in. I staggered over planks and broken bricks into the deserted room. There was a moldy smell of damp, cold stones. A heap of sand lay there, a gray, bright speck. Otherwise, all else was dark. Suddenly, a terrified voice called to me. "In God's name, Sinclair, where have you come from?" A human figure rose out of the darkness close to me. A little, thin shape, like a ghost. I recognized, while yet my hair was standing on end, my school companion, Nauer. "How did you get here?" he asked, as if mad with excitement. "How have you been able to find me?" I did not understand. "Wasn't looking for you," I said, dazed. I spoke with difficulty. The words came from me painfully, as if from dead, heavy, frozen lips. "You weren't looking for me?" "No, I was drawn here." "Did you call me?" "You must have called." "But what are you doing here? It's still night." He put his thin arms convulsively round me. Oh my. "Yes, night. It must soon be morning. Oh, Sinclair, to think that you didn't forget me. Can you ever forgive me?" "What then?" "I was so hateful." Then I recollected our conversation. Had that taken place 4, 5 days ago? It seemed to me like a lifetime. But suddenly, I knew all. Not only what had occurred between us, but also why I had come, and what Nauer wanted to do there. "You wanted then to take your life, Nauer?" He shuddered through cold and fear. "Yes, I wanted to. But I don't know whether I could have. I wished to wait until the morning came." I drew him into the open. The first oblique rays of day glimmered indescribably cold through the gray atmosphere. I led the boy on my arm a little way. I heard my own voice saying, "Now go home, and don't say anything to anybody. You were on a false track. A false track! And we are not swine, as you think. We are men. We make gods, and we wrestle with them, and they bless us." Silently, we went on, and separated. Then, when I came home, it was day. The best that mystery in St. Hermann had yet to give me was the hours with Pistorius at the organ, or by the chimney fire. We read a Greek text about Abraxas together. He read to me portions of a translation of the Veda, and taught me to say the sacred Om. However, it was not this learned instruction which was of service to my inner self, but rather the contrary. What did me good was the self-progression I made, the increasing confidence in my own dreams, thoughts, and presentiments, and the consciousness of the power that I carried in me. I had an excellent understanding with Pistorius in every way. I needed only to think intently of him, and I could be sure that he, or a greeting from him, would come to me. I could ask him, just as I could Demian, something or other, without his being there in person. I needed only to imagine his presence and to put my questions to him as intensive thoughts. Then, all the soul force I had put into the question came back to me as answer. Only, it was not the person of Pistorius which I called up in my imagination, nor that of Max Demian, but it was the picture I had painted, and of which I had dreamed. It was the half-man, half-woman dream picture of my Damon, to which I called. It lived now not only in my dreams, it was no longer painted on paper, but it was in me, as a desire picture and as an enhancement of my spiritual self. The relation into which the unsuccessful suicide now entered with me was peculiar, and sometimes amusing. Since... hold on, what? Okay. Ignoring the part that he's thinking the motivation and the relationship that was caused by the aborted suicide was amusing, not the aborted suicide itself. Whew! Whew! Had a moment there. Since the night I had been sent to him, he dogged my steps like a faithful servant or hound, sought to attach himself to me, and followed me blindly. He came to me with curious questions and wishes. He wanted to see spirits, to learn the Kabbalah, and he did not believe me when I assured him I understood nothing of these things. He credited me with being able to do anything, but it was singular that he often came to me with his queer and silly questions just at the moment when I myself had a mental knot to be disentangled. His moody ideas and concerns often gave me the cue, the impulse which helped me in the solution of my own problems. He was often tiresome, and I imperiously drove him away. I felt, however, that he had been sent to me, and what I gave to him I received twofold in return. He was also a guide, or rather, a way. The mad books and publications he brought me, and in which he sought the key to happiness, taught me more than I realized at the time. This now vanished later from my path. Neither did I miss him. No arrangement, no understanding was necessary with him, but it was with Pistorius. Towards the close of my school career in St. Herfer, I lived through another peculiar experience with my friend. Even innocuous, innocent people are not altogether spared the shock of a conflict. Even they come once in their lives in conflict with the beautiful virtues of piety and gratitude. Each must make the step which parts him from his father, from his teachers. Each must once feel something of the bitterness of loneliness, though most people cannot support it for long, and soon creep back to their homes again. It was not a great struggle for me to part from my parents and their world, the bright world of my beautiful childhood, but slowly and almost imperceptibly, I got further from them and became more of a stranger to them. I regretted it. It often caused me bitter hours during my visits home, but it was not deep. I could bear it. But when we have offered love and reverence of our own accord, and not out of habit, when we have been disciples and friends with our innermost feelings, then it is a bitter and terrible moment, when the realization is suddenly brought home to us that the guiding current of our life is bearing us away from those we love. Then every thought of ours which rejects our friend and teacher enters our own heart like a poisoned sting. Every blow of self-defense strikes back into our own face. Then he who felt that the dictates of his own conscience were authentic guide reproaches himself with the terms faithlessness and ingratitude. Then the terrified heart flees anxiously back to the valleys of childhood virtues, and cannot believe that the rupture must take place, that another bond must be severed. In the course of time, a feeling had slowly developed in me which refused to recognize my friend Pistorius unconditionally as my guide. What I experienced in the most important moments of my youth was my friendship with him. his counsel, his consolation, his proximity. God had spoken to me through him. Through him, my dreams returned to me. From his mouth came their explanation. From him, I learned their significance. He had given me the courage to realize myself, and now, alas, I felt a growing opposition against him. In his conversation, he evinced too clearly a desire to instruct me. I felt it was only one side of my nature that he thoroughly understood. There was no quarrel, no scene between us, no rupture. I said to him only a single, really harmless word. But nevertheless, it was the moment when an illusion between us fell in colored pieces. The presentiment had for some time already oppressed me. But one Sunday in his scholarly old room, this presentiment changed to a definite feeling. We were lying on the floor before the fire. He was speaking of mysteries and religious forms which he was studying, and on which he was meditating. He occupied himself with trying to picture their possible future. To me, all this seemed curious and interesting, but scarcely of vital importance. It smacked of erudition. It was like a fatiguing search among the ruins of former worlds, and all at once I felt an aversion to the whole business. From this cult of mythology, and from this sort of piecing together, this mosaic work of religious forms which had been handed down to posterity. Pistorius, I said suddenly, in a malicious outburst which surprised and frightened even myself, relate a dream, a real dream, one that you have had in the night. What you have just been talking about is so cursedly antiquarian. He had never heard me speak thus. With shame and terror, I realized at the very same moment that the arrow I had shot at him, and which had entered his heart, was taken from his own quiver. I realized I had heard him reproach himself in ironical tone on this very account, and that now I had maliciously turned one of his own reproaches against him like a resharpened arrow. He felt it instantly, and was silent. I looked at him with terror in my heart, and saw that he had become very pale. After a long, heavy pause, he put some wood on the fire and said quietly, "You're quite right, Sinclair. You're a wise fellow. I'll spare you all this antiquarian business." He spoke very quietly, but his tone told me how deeply he had been wounded. What had he done? I was on the point of tears. I wanted to beg his pardon with all my heart, to assure him of my affection and gratitude. Moving words came into my mind. I could not utter them. He was silent as well, and so we lay there, while the flames leaped up and then sank, and with each flame that paled fell something beautiful and fervid that ceased to glow and had vanished, never again to come back. "I fear you have misunderstood me," I said at last, much crushed, and with a dry, hoarse voice. The silly, senseless words came as if mechanically from my lips, as if I had been reading them out of a news sheet. "I understood you perfectly," said Pistorius softly. "You're quite right." We waited. Then he continued slowly. "So far as one man can be right in his judgment of another." No, a voice inside me said, "I am wrong!" But I could not say anything. I knew that I had aimed my single little word at his one essential weakness. I had touched the point of which he himself was distrustful. His idea was antiquarian. He was a seeker, but retrogressive. He was a romantic. And suddenly I realized that it was just what he had been to me, and had given me, that he could not be and give to himself. He had guided me to a point on the road beyond which he, the guide, could not go. God knows how I could have uttered such a word. I had not meant it badly. I had had no idea it would lead to a catastrophe. I had uttered something, the import of which I did not myself realize at the moment of the utterance. I had surrendered myself to a somewhat witty, somewhat malicious inspiration, and fate used it as her instrument. I had been guilty of a little thoughtlessness, crudeness, and he had accepted it as a judgment. I know this is a bit of... It seems lighthearted here. It's a couple people whose heads are in the clouds as they're thinking that they're full of hot air, as imagining themselves as philosophers. But sometimes it is these little single words that can cut right to the bone. And why it's so important that we're careful what we say. And I say that as I go full stream of consciousness on a regular basis. But that's kind of what I do. It's the nature of things. But yeah, it's not to be preachy here, but to be constantly aware of your own thoughts and speech, and the impact they can have is kind of what constitutes an adult, a mature adult anyway, to have awareness of the impact of your own actions and voice, and to know when it's time to just shut the fuck up. Having that self-awareness is important. Oh, how much I wished then that he would have got angry, have defended himself, have shouted at me, but he did nothing. The fact that he could not showed me more than anything else how hard I hit him. And because Pistorius took the blow from me, his presumptuous and ungrateful pupil, so quietly, because he silently agreed with me, because he recognized my word as a judgment of fate, he caused me to hate myself. He made my thoughtlessness seem 1,000 times greater than it was. As I struck, I had thought to hit a strong man, capable of defending himself. Now he was a meek, suffering creature, defenseless, who surrendered in silence. We remained a long time lying before the dying fire, in which each glowing figure, each crumbling ash heap called to my memory happy, beautiful, rich hours. Watch dinged, and now I lost track of my page. Making my guilt and my obligation to Pistorius greater and greater. Finally, I could bear it no longer. I got up and went. A long time I stood before his door. A long time I listened on the dark staircase. A long time I stood outside in front of the house, waiting to see whether perhaps he would come out to me. And then I went on, walking for hours and hours through town and suburbs, park and wood, until evening fell. At that moment, I felt for the first time the mark of Cain on my forehead. That's a throwback. We haven't seen the Cain reference in a while. I fell to pondering and rumination. I had every intention in thinking matters over to accuse myself and to defend Pistorius, but all ended to the contrary. 1,000 times I was ready to repent of my rash word and to withdraw it, but it had been true, nevertheless. Now I succeeded in understanding Pistorius, in building up his whole dream. His dream had been to be a priest, to proclaim a new religion, to invent new forms of exaltation, of love, of worship, to set up new symbols. But this was not within his province. He lingered too long in the past. He knew too much of what had been. He knew too much of Egypt, of India, of Mithras, of Abraxas. His love was attached to ideas with which the world was already familiar. And in his inmost self, he probably recognized that the new religion had to be different. It had to spring from fresh sources and not be drawn out of collections and libraries. His office was perhaps to help men to find themselves, as he had done with me. But to found a new doctrine, to give new gods to the world, was not his function in life. And at this point, the realization came upon me that Everyone has an office,
A charge.
but to no one is it permitted to choose his office for himself, and to discharge it as he likes. It was wrong to want new gods. It was entirely wrong to wish to give the world
Anything.
A man has absolutely no other duty than this: to seek himself, to grope his own way forward, no matter whither it leads. That thought impressed itself deeply on me. That was the fruit of this new event for me. Often had I pictured the future. I had dreamed of filling roles which might be destined for me, as poet perhaps, or prophet, as painter, or some such role. All that was of no account. I was not here to write, to preach, to paint. Neither I nor anyone else was here for that purpose. All that was secondary. The true vocation for everyone was only to attain to self-realization. I might end as a poet or as madman, as prophet or as criminal. That was not his affair. That was of no consequence in the long run. His business was to work out his own destiny. Not any destiny, but his own. To live for that entirely and uninterruptedly. Everything else was merely an attempt to shun his fate, to fly back to the ideals of the masses, to adapt himself to circumstances. It was fear of his own inner being. There rose before me this new picture, terrible and sacred, suggested to me 100 times ere this, perhaps often already expressed, but now, for the first time, lived. It was a throw from nature's dice box, a projection into the unknown, perhaps into something new, perhaps into the void, and my sole vocation was to let this throw up from primeval depths work itself out in me, to feel its will in me, and to make it mine, that solely. I had already known what it was to be very lonely. Now I felt that I could be lonelier still, and that I could not escape from it. I made no attempt to reconcile myself with Pistorius. We remained friends, but our relationship towards one another had changed. Only a single time did we mention it, or rather, it was only he who spoke of the matter. He said,
"I don't want to be a priest. You know that. I would best of all like to be the priest of the religion of which we have so many presentiments. I can never be that. I know. I've known it already for some time, without fully admitting it. I will do some other priestly service, perhaps at the organ, perhaps in another way. I must always be surrounded by something which I find beautiful and sacred. Organ music and mystery, symbol and myth. I need that, and I cannot persuade myself to leave it. It is my weakness. I often realize, Sinclair, that I should not have such desires. They are luxury and a weakness. It would be greater. It would be more right if I placed myself quite simply at the disposition of fate without pretensions. That is the sole thing I cannot do. Perhaps you will some time be able to do it. It is hard. It's the only thing really hard there is, my friend. I have often dreamed of it. I cannot do it. I tremble at the thought of it. I cannot stand so completely naked and alone. I am a poor, weak hound. Needs a little warmth and food. Occasionally he likes to feel the proximity of his own kind. He, whose only desire is to work out his own destiny, has no kith or kin, but stands alone, and has only the cold world space around him. Do you know that is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? There could have been martyrs who willingly let themselves be nailed to the cross, but even they were not heroes. They were not free. They also wished for something to which they had been accustomed, which they had loved, with which they had felt at home. They had examples or ideals. He who will fulfill his destiny has neither examples nor ideals. He has nothing dear to him, nothing to comfort him. And one really ought to go this way. People like you and I. are certainly very lonely. We still have each other. We have the secret satisfaction of being different, of revolting, of wanting the unusual, but we must drop that too. If we would go the whole way, we must not wish to be revolutionaries, or examples of martyrs to think the thought to its logical end.
No, one could not think beyond that. But one could dream of it, could sense it, could anticipate it. A few times I realized something of this, in a very quiet hour. Then I looked straight into the open, staring eyes of my fate. They could have been full of wisdom, or full of madness. They could be full of love or full of wickedness. It was all one. One was to choose nothing of all that. One was to want nothing. One was only to want oneself, one's destiny. In that way had Pistorius served me, for a time as a guide. In those days I walked about as if I were blind. Storms roared within me. Every step meant danger. I was conscious of nothing but the precipitous darkness in front of me, down to which all the roads I had trodden hitherto seemed to lead. And in my inward self I saw the picture of the guide who resembled Demian, and in whose eyes stood my fate. I wrote on a sheet of paper, "A guide has left me. I stand in complete darkness. I cannot take a step alone. Help me." I wished to send that to Demian, yet I omitted to do this. For each time I wished to do it, it seemed foolish and meaningless. But I knew that little prayer by heart, and often said it to myself. It accompanied me hourly. I began to realize what prayer is. My school career was over. My father had arranged that during the holidays I was to travel, and then I was to go to the university. In which faculty I knew not. I was to be allowed to take philosophy for one semester. I should have been equally content with anything else. Alright, that brings us to the end of chapter 6. That we are about 3/4 of the way through the book, and actually, okay, so there are only 2 chapters left. So we will definitely be finishing this on Sunday. Depending on how long these chapters are, we might end up going over, but this is the game plan. So, let's go ahead and get out of our little reading nook. So, this has been an interesting reading, an interesting session. Things have taken turns, certainly. We're starting to get very philosophical as Emil is growing into his own man and coming up with his own ideas and is sort of tasting and sampling from different philosophies, different ideas, different traditions, different paths. He's slowly coming into his own. And we're kind of bouncing between the coming of age and the self-discovery portions. Where a person might become their own person. Whether what they're becoming is what has been handed to them or what they've discovered and found for themselves. It's interesting. It's a nice little thought experiment, and as the author or the narrator has said a few times throughout this, self-realization is the end goal. And that can work out. It can work out pretty well. But it does sort of read like a philosophy. I guess we're at the 201 level at this point, because it seems a little bit more thought out, a little bit more identifiable and well-reasoned than anything that was really a 101. We're not dealing with the kid in class who's talking just to hear himself speak anymore, but we're at the point where there's only so much that class can actually give you. There's only so much that you can be taught. And there comes a point where, if you're trying to find a path, you need to do it yourself. And we're coming into that point with Emil. He's had his mentors, he's had his guide. He's had a few guides. He was using sort of as a buoy in the storm, a lighthouse to guide himself through the dark night. But as he's come to each, he's realizing that there's a fog covering the light from the beam from the lighthouse, and he needs to stumble through and find his own way. There was a short point here where he was serving as a guide to someone else, Nauer, the boy who was in a different part of his own spiritual journey that almost ended tragically. But I don't know, there comes a point also when the transition from mentee to mentor is also part of growing up. Everyone has a part, someone in their history, someone you remember who came to you for advice, wanted to be led along the way their own way. Whether that's triggered in yourself a lesson to be learned for your own way, and how you've decided to take that, whether it's called to yourself a new calling, or whether it was just a shock to your own system. It could be anything. But that's, again, part of the growing up, part of the coming of age that this story is really all about. So, yeah, I'm interested to see how this ends. It's not what I would have expected at any point. And I am, again, shocked that this was originally in German. Would you believe it? The way this has been translated and localized is nothing short of fantastic. It feels like natural English. It feels like it was originally English. That's how well it was done. And that's something that we really can't afford to lose. There's a dryness to machine translations. There's a dryness to AI translations that cannot be a replacement for a really good, organic, human translation. And I'm afraid that this is going to be a dying art, because there's so much of a push to take the people out of this art. Yeah, direct translation is never enough. Even in a relatively simple translation, German to English is easier than in many languages. But that's not to say that direct translation is enough. You can't just go direct one-to-one. There's nuance on both the source and the destination languages that really needs to have multiple layers of editing, reading, cross-checking, and verification to get that feel. Because if this was just chunked into Google Translate, it would have not felt so good as this. And this is a perspective that a lot of people that don't have any even smattering of bilingualism don't really understand. Direct translations don't work. There's nuance on all languages, but there are nuances in different places, in different ways. Whether it's a bit of a... Yeah, exactly. Yeah, saying as a JRPG fan, there's direct translations just don't work. It leaves so much to be desired. Because English has different nuance, different feelings to word choice, or even in the same words and how they're delivered. In the same way, Japanese has all sorts of different things that, like, the word choice, the kanji usage, which meanings, the furi you use, the nuance, the cultural aspects that just don't come over. Even in good translations, there are things lost. And that's not to say that one language is more complex than another. It's just that they're all complex in their own ways and they don't mesh up equally. And that's why the human touch in translation is so important. And I am afraid that we're going to be losing it. We've gone off topic. All right, so we are going to be wrapping up here tonight. Our next reading, tomorrow, we are returning to Hyperion, the second installation in our second unarchived story reading. This one has been a fun, also philosophical, religious sort of thing. Yeah, the AI bubble is taking its sweet time in bursting. It's the as someone in tech, it couldn't happen soon enough. The cost of hardware refresh is going insane right now. Yikes. All right, so tomorrow we'll be returning to our unarchived reading of Hyperion. As always, our classics readings will be archived on YouTube channel, and we do keep our VODs going on Twitch these days, but the YouTube will be forever. Twitch will be ephemeral, as these things are. If you have not yet, I encourage you to follow us on YouTube, or I guess to subscribe on YouTube, give us a like on the stream, let the algorithm know that we're doing some fun things, and it will let you find us to catch up if you ever miss any of our readings. Things are arranged into playlists, so you can either go from the start of time and follow along with everything we've read, or just pick a book, pick an author, and go through there. I generally try to put a little bit of effort into making sure that the playlists are right. If you're over on the Twitch side, welcome. We're just getting started. It has been about 2 months now. We are very, very getting near to our next goal of followers, which is going to be 25, wherein we will have to have a decision to make, whether we'll want to go with affiliate and start doing the logistic snafu of timing ad breaks. I'm slowly learning that Twitch is kind of a pain in the ass sometimes. Or whatever we want to do. Anyway, let's go ahead and see if we've got any other friends that are out there that we can raid into. I like finding new readers. I like finding others that are around, because it's fun. We're slowly building a community. So let's see if anyone is out there in the reading and writing category that we can jump into tonight. Anyone that we've seen before, anyone that maybe we can discover something new. So let's see. Someone is reading a Potter-inspired thing. That's a big nope from me, Chief. Oh, my oh my. Wiederholungen? Yeah, that's a little... I know we've been reading a German-sourced book, but that's a little much for me there. Let's see. Somebody's doing fairy tales. Why is this guy in reading and writing? Let's see if I was looking through. All right, I think our best bet is going to be to go over to Ultra Blue, who we have rated several times before. She is reading Jane Eyre. I think she's probably not too far left in her night. She's been going for about an hour and a half. But we can at least say hi. Give her our best. And we'll just do what we do. So, we'll be finishing up here. As always, thank you so very much for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 o'clock, mind the earlier start time, for our unarchived reading of Hyperion. Until then, have a wonderful night, and thank you very much.
These are portions of my life of when I am sure much people would know. So reading the Mars book? Or was it the Fellowship? Oh, okay, you're reading a new book. How's that? Because I'm very slow reading this book. It's the slowest I've ever read a book on the channel. Normally, I read a book in like 6 streams. This one, on the other hand, we've already read 6 streams of this book. We're 150%-ish. It's pretty interesting so far. A bit of an exploration of coming of age in the physical. Okay, that sounds nice. Yeah, this is actually my last chapter because I have not done a reading stream in like a week. Because I was so busy this week. So this stream is gonna be actually around the same time. My normal streams are about like 2 hours for reading